Hello everybody, Dokkan Assets here. Today we are back with another end of the year top 5 video. Today we are hopping into the top 5 worst Dokkan Battle animations of 2021. It was actually really difficult to make this video compared to the best of, because this year has been fantastic for animations, and I'm gonna go over this in the rules, but it was really hard to choose for this video, so let's go over said rules to give you the criteria. If you're familiar with last year's videos, it is the same as last year, only Dokkan Fest LR, and unfeatured LR animations. I feel it's not fair to compare them to free-to-play and unfeatured units. Obviously, a lot more work and effort and all the rest is put into the big boy featured units compared to your lower tier units on the animation spectrum, right? If I didn't apply this rule, we would basically be looking at a bunch of animations like this. So obviously that's not really interesting, because I think anybody could tell you why that's bad. Moving on to rule number 2, we'll cover all types of animations in these videos: essays, unit essays, active skills, transformations, etc. This is basically because if I did break it down, every single type could be a own video, and like a 30-minute video at that, and your boy nor has the time nor the editing prowess to make that happen in good quality. So I'm putting it all into a video here. This is just going to be all different types of animations. Every card gets one slot. Obviously, sometimes I feel like there could be points where maybe one unit's animations would be in the same slot, or maybe they would be in multiple slots, whatever it would be. But just to make the video more interesting and not talk about the same unit over and over, and actually this year I believe this wasn't so much of a problem, but every card only gets one slot as well. Obviously this is only animations from the year 2021 on JP, just because that makes it easy to, you know, just kind of sanction off what we're taking a look at this year. And of course JP Dokkan is kind of what we go for in terms of the timeline of Dokkan, right? Number 5, just keep in mind that all of this is my opinion. These are by no means objectively bad, right? I don't really think that there is an objectively bad animation, except for Rose's 12 key. That one's garbage. But besides that, right, literally, if you like an animation or not, it's just your opinion. So of course this entire video is just my opinion. And of course, number 6, it was very hard to choose bad ones. Dokkan not only had some fantastic animations this year, but even the ones that I personally thought that were on the lower end of the spectrum were either just kind of like okay, or really what sums this up nicely is this video is more like my top 5 most disliked animations of 2021, but obviously worst is a better title, right? The only one that I think is genuinely bad in this list is actually number 1. I think the rest of these are either just disappointing or I just don't like them personally. And again, it's like rating your favorite things, right? You have to put your least favorite thing on the bottom, but it doesn't mean you dislike it. The only one that I dislike is number 1. Like I said, really, I think the rest of these are just kind of okay. So let's go ahead and move into our honorable mentions to start off here. So basically, these were just ones that didn't make the top 5. I also decided to limit myself to 5 of these because I did have some more on there, but they were really just small nitpicks, and even smaller nitpicks than the ones that I have for you for my 5 honorable mentions here, because the things that I find with these essays that are wrong are very small, and that should also be something good for you as the viewer to kind of think about, because that just means that generally Dokkan animations are getting better and better as time goes on. By the way, I do want to apologize if you hear me clicking throughout this video. I'm clicking through notes and different animations on the screen and all that good stuff, so you're going to hear a little bit of that. Regardless though, hopping into our honorable mentions here, the first one I want to talk about is LR STR Super Saiyan God Goku and hits 18 key. I think overall, this super attack is pretty good. I love hits animations. I love Goku's ki in the beginning. All I think is really kind of in this is everything after hit zooms forward. Goku's animations are just kind of lame. They don't really have a lot of impact, and they're super janky is really my problem with them. Another one that I was not the biggest fan of was LR Tech Gogeta's 12 key. There are some great parts about this essay, like the kick is fantastic, the beams moving from the ki blast at the end is fantastic, but I am definitely not a fan of the very beginning because the art style is completely different from the rest of the essay. The punch is also very janky, and the entire Kamehameha portion is just not good. From the wind-up to the part where he actually is firing it off and does the Gohan / Super Vegito face, to after they show the card art and then they have him on screen, it is literally just a PNG of him with the ball from the Kamehameha. They literally just clicked the corner of it in Photoshop and zoomed it out so it would just grow bigger, basically. It just doesn't look good at all. They could have animated him moving, you know, they could have animated his hair moving, his arms maybe shaking a little bit, you know, the ground breaking around him, but instead, we got Stinky. Moving on, we have LR Goku and Piccolo's 12 key. This one isn't really anything specific besides the fact that the punches don't really feel like they have a lot of impact on Goku's side. I just thought that this one was just kind of okay. I looked at this and didn't go, wow! And I looked at this and I also didn't go, ugh! I was just like, eh? Really, that was just the end of it. It was just very middling for me. Very mid, as one might say. The other one that I thought was kind of actually a really unfortunate one that I was a little bit put off by was the Universe 7 active skill. Overall, I do quite like it. The beginning is super cool. I think everybody's ki looks great. But Goku's arms are super janky when he's charging up the Kamehameha as well. The layering on it is incorrect, right? Obviously, the ki blast should be in his hands, but his ki is over his thumbs, which doesn't make any sense because it's charging up in between his fingers and not like over his fingers. So layering error on that one was kind of unfortunate. And when they all fire the beam, I'm not talking about the part where they show all their faces because that looks great, right? When the beam is going in the sky, it just looks so uneventful. It's just like, oh wow, blue line, right? And then the actual ki blast itself looks kind of lame. The explosion is cool though. And finally, probably if I had to pick a number 6 on this list, this would have been it, right? This was Int GT Vegeta's super attack. For me personally, this one was just peak mediocrity. Literally, it was just so basic, right? Like, there wasn't anything in here that I was like, wow, cool, except for the one part where the shot was first person. That single shot, I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. But the rest of it, I was just kind of like, I didn't really think it was bad. Overall, I think it's really nice, like, in terms of animation, but I think that the whole thing is just sort of uneventful, and it's just like, you know, again, very middling, very mid for me personally. Coming in at number 5, we have FIZ LR Janemba's 18 key super attack. This is one of those supers, when I saw it, I was just really disappointed. And frankly, whenever I use this unit, I go out of my way to use the 12 key rather than the 18 key. To be honest with you, the beginning of this super, I actually think is pretty cool. Obviously, the wind up of the kick and then into the way that they do it with it lining up with the sprite is actually pretty decent. Janemba's initial slide is a little bit basic, but I think the overall execution of the animation is okay. But everything after that just pretty much goes downhill. When Janemba's charging up the ki, it looks okay, but his movements when he actually moves forward towards Pikkon are just sort of janky. It's almost like 3 specific poses that they mesh together, and then the ki blasts just do not look good. They really remind me of the way that they used to do ki blast and explosions on some older units. I am just absolutely not a fan. And the way that the portals look too, they really do just look like PNG splattered on there. And the ki blasts don't have a lot of impact. It's just, it's not pleasing to look at. I've seen a lot better Dokkan essays when it comes to a bunch of ki. Janemba sliding forward looks okay, and this is actually the part of the essay that I really love, of course, the Legos. I was really hoping that they would include this in the essay, but then we get to my least favorite part of the essay, which is when Janemba smashes his fists against the enemy's head. Obviously, this is a reference to when he takes out Pycon, but the problem is, with the sprite, this looks super janky, and to make matters worse, when Janemba is actually charging up the Ki Blast, it looks super weird because the Ki Blast being charged in his mouth is layered over the enemy sprite, which makes absolutely no sense. The Ki Blast would be under the other character because obviously it's charging up in his mouth, and even in the little section afterward where he blasts it, it's clearly coming from his mouth to the back of the enemy character. It's just so weird. I don't know why they decided to layer it that way. And then for the final explosion, it just kind of looks okay. It's just like a circle that grows with a little bit of effects around it to give it that little bit of sparkle. There were definitely a lot better explosions for Dokkan essays this year. But overall, it was just kind of disappointing more than anything. Like, seeing the Ki Blast hit the character with the pink Ki Blast was just kind of like, oh, I don't like that. And then having the cherry on top of the Ki Blast being layered over the enemy character. Not to mention, obviously, this essay is already taken down a bunch of notches by the fact that you have to look at the enemy sprites, which is not really a fault of the essay itself, but obviously, whenever people see those sprites, they're automatically turned off. And I like what they're trying to do with them because they're trying to sort of make animations more dynamic by using them. But I think using them has the opposite effect because they look so bad. They turn people off from the essay. But I think even without the sprite, you know, looking terrible, I think even if it looked good with all the problems that the essay has, it definitely sits pretty good here at the number 5 slot. Coming in at number 4, this one actually may surprise some of you. We have the STR Videl's unit super attack. Now, when I saw this super attack, I was initially pretty disappointed because I think overall, this unit's animations are actually really great, but there's a couple of things with this essay that sort of turned me off to it. For one, again, this year has been full of reusing different scenes from fighters. Obviously, in the beginning of this essay, we had Videl and Gohan kicking downward. We, of course, had the androids intro scene for their super attack. We even had the future Trunks have part of his animations taken from fighters, and I don't necessarily think that that is a bad thing, but it just kind of stinks because it's like, I'd rather have something a little bit more original, right? And a lot of the time it seems like, at least for me personally, whenever I've seen them do these fighters sort of copy paste things, they kind of tend to look worse in Dokkan, and when Dokkan does something original, it tends to look better. At least that's just how I personally feel, or at least from the examples that we've seen so far, that's kind of the impression that I've gotten. As well, just besides the fact that that animation is from fighters at all, right? I don't think that personally it's really got a lot of impact. I like the whole gimmick of obviously Gohan and Videl working together for a super attack, and having them both jump out of the plane is pretty neat. When they fly down, it looks okay, but I will say, I kind of would have rather had them been a little bit closer to the camera. Maybe the idea would have been that it would have been harder to tell that they were kicking, but if their legs were extended together, I don't think that it would have been that difficult to tell. But personally, I just think that the sprites, or not the sprites, but the actual like character models, I guess would be the best to say, because they're not actually character models, they're just a bunch of pieces put together, but I suppose together they make a model, right? Just don't look super great to me. Again, I kind of wish that there was a little bit more emphasis on the detail there. But what's really the part that I don't like is when they land, it does not feel like they have any impact with the ground at all. Obviously, the ground breaks and there are some rocks flying, but it really just feels like some homie is dragging the Gohan and Videl PNG across the screen, which really is what's happening here for this animation. They are quite literally just being dragged across the screen, putting some effects to sort of spice it up a little bit. And then moving on to the part where they're actually taking on the enemy, I just feel like the punches don't really have a lot of impact. I'm not sure if that's because of the animation itself with Gohan and Videl. I think that that definitely plays a little bit of a part of it. But unfortunately, I think this might be another L for the sprites. Because, of course, when it comes to Dokkan sprites, since there are only a couple of different poses and reactions that characters can have in their sprite form, obviously, when a character is getting hit as the enemy, it looks very janky, right? The Spopovich in this example is literally the same sprite, just basically being tilted every which way as he's being punched around, which I definitely don't think helps. So either way, though, with all of those pieces put together, this just kind of makes me not really enjoy this animation as much as I feel like I could. Even Gohan's kick at the end, just by himself, really also doesn't feel like it has a lot of impact, right? He literally just moves his leg out. I do like that there is a little bit of minimal movement with Gohan, which is definitely a testament to how far Dokkan SAs have come, bringing these characters to life a lot more than before, because that definitely would have been two PNGs, one with his leg in and one with his leg out to kick before. So it is cool to see that little bit of new Dokkan flair in there, and I actually quite like the end of this where they both give each other a thumbs up. That is absolutely my favorite part of this animation, but overall, just not really a fan. Coming in at number 3, we have FIZ Goku's Super Attack, the GT version. Now, when I originally saw this animation, I actually thought that it was pretty good, but over time, after watching it over and over, I have actually grown less and less fond of this animation. I do like the beginning still. I love the charging part in the beginning. That's probably my favorite, albeit the rocks do look a little bit almost too smooth in the way that they look. Like, they kind of don't look like that it's Goku powering up and shattering the earth with all of this debris around him. It looks like an animator went through and clicked, okay, move from here to here, and that's what the rocks did. But I think the Ki and Goku himself actually do look pretty cool in that shot. As well, the part where obviously Goku is standing there with the smoke to his back, I actually think is a really, really nice shot. And even though Goku is a little bit small there, and I definitely think that they could have, you know, made him a little bit bigger rather than maybe zooming the camera in, I do quite like that shot with the smoke with him just standing there, obviously after powering up. The charge forward is okay, and this is where the animation starts to go downhill for me personally. So it doesn't help that he's far away, because it seems like a lot of the time nowadays, maybe it's just because we're so spoiled by all these nice close-up shots, but whenever we get sections of Dokkan SAs where the characters are very far away, it definitely doesn't feel as good, and they definitely don't use as much animation as obviously when a character is close up, which, you know, makes sense. That is kind of how animation works, right? But it just kind of leaves the SA feeling a little bit empty, and obviously the movement not really feeling like it has a lot of impact. Like Goku's knee on Rildo there is literally just the PNG sliding with an effect there. Goku's hand then raising up to charge the Ki also just feels a little bit janky. It doesn't really feel fluid to me. It just, again, kind of looks like they're tilting a hand. The Ki itself looks okay with it glowing, and then when he's just rapidly firing the Ki blasts have no impact on the enemy, and there's obviously just a general shine around where the Ki blasts are hitting the enemy whenever they make contact, but the Ki blasts themselves really, really don't feel like they have any impact whatsoever. And obviously Goku is just moving his arms. He's doing the famous "that's Vegeta's" technique, but it definitely feels a lot more reminiscent of some of the lamer animation in Dragon Ball Heroes, to be honest, when they're firing Ki blasts off, where the Ki blasts just feel like they have no impact from launch to contact. Then obviously we have the final punch, which looks okay, but it definitely does feel a little bit janky in the movement. I do think it could have been a little more fluid. This is another example of where they sort of pick 3 poses, maybe 4, and then have the character go from one to the next, and then have the full animation, you know, technically be created with these couple of different poses, with obviously some minimal movement throughout to sort of try and make it a little bit more lifelike. Where Goku is actually standing right in front of the camera and the enemy is flying through the smoke cloud, I do think that that part part is pretty okay. Obviously, there's not a lot of movement from Goku, but he just threw the punch, so I do like the smoke in that scene. And then when Goku sort of brings his arms back, also looks a little bit janky to end up charging the Kamehameha. As well, the actual ki doesn't have a lot of movement in this section, which is really weird because a lot of SAs, they do a great job sort of making the ki feel very animated and a lot more realistic to the anime, I suppose. Not realistic to real life, obviously. They do fix that a little bit more when they show this side shot of Goku with him charging up the ki. But again, this is just a PNG of him standing here and little beams going in a circle around the actual ball in his hand. So it doesn't really feel too crazy. And then obviously when he launches the super attack, they're basically just going through a couple of frames for Goku's movement, which I don't think looks too bad, to be honest. I think that that's okay. The Ki Blast coming out of his actual hands in this section is literally just kind of going in and out to simulate it being like bigger and smaller, right? And then the actual beam is just very lame. It's another one of those straight line to going forward ones where it's like, oh wow, a blue line. Definitely not as bad as the Universe 7 squad, but still kind of lame. And then the explosion at the end is just okay. So overall, a lot of this I don't really like. Again, the beginning I do still think is pretty solid, but just a lot of jank, and again, not a lot of impact. Coming in at number 2, we have Tech LR Super 17. Sorry, I'm asking again. This was actually the only character that, upon initially reviewing all of the essays for this year in preparation for this video, that I actually considered putting some of his other animations in the honorable mentions, especially when I saw this guy for the first time. I was not a fan right off the bat in terms of the animation department, which is weird because now looking back, even though the active skill does have a little bit of janky points, I think overall it is really, really good, especially with the key effects in it. And even the 12 key super, even though there isn't a ton that goes on in it, I do quite like everything that they do with obviously removing his hand and the sort of minigun that is his arm, right? And firing it at the enemy, especially the end shot of him locking it onto his hand, I think is really clean, and the expression at the end. But I still think that the 18 key is terrible. That is an opinion that certainly has not changed. This essay is another one that is just so mid. Like, really, I think that the term mid kind of gets thrown around in a sort of incorrect manner nowadays. Mid means middle, right? The exact middle of anything, right? But I think mid in this case I'm sort of using as the slang term of mid, right? When people are like, oh, mid, you know, that sort of thing. That is really how I feel about this animation. The only part about this animation that I like is the part where Super 17 isn't in it, which is really ironic, that being the part where, of course, the character gets thrown into the forest and then the smoke cloud shoots up of obviously them being dragged against the ground and then coming out of the trees at the end. I really, really like that part. And funny enough, in a lot of essays, you also hear this a lot in my top 10 best of the year, but effects on key blasts and smoke and dust and explosions and stuff like that in essays have improved tremendously throughout Dokkan's history, and that is honestly what impresses me a lot more these days about specific animations. However, getting back to Super 17 here, the rest of this animation is just so the beginning part where he's flying forward is alright, but the initial hit to Goku does not feel like it has any impact at all. The next part where he swings his fist forward also just feels very, very jank. Again, it's sort of one of those examples that I was saying before where they kind of pick 3 poses and then have him go from it. It is literally like his arm is back a little bit forward and then bam, it's forward immediately, and it's like, oh, huh? Where was the wind up there? And obviously the character just flies off a screen. Then, of course, he teleports forward, which I do think that the teleport looks pretty good, but the kick in the windup looks, again, pretty janky because it's really like 3 poses, and then bam, there's the kick. I will say, once it actually makes contact, I do quite like the final bit of the windup, and then when it actually hits the character, the angle is really, really cool when it moves. Obviously, when it finishes, it has another little jerk there, but on that part, I do still think I like that end of the kick. Obviously, oh, your boy loves that smoke. It is absolutely fantastic, bro. Then, of course, moving on to 17 coming back into the frame with the teleport. The Ki Blast just feels like it is not very impactful at all. As well, the wind up to the Ki Blast is, again, he's there, and then he's just in Goku's face immediately, right? Like, the wind up is about 3 little bits of move forward, and then my man is just all up in Goku's business. It just is very, very janky, and especially the zoom in too just feels really weird, because they zoom in to 17 like they're gonna show his back or sort of move around, but then it's like hard cut, and then it's the side shot, which is just very, very jarring for this essay. Again, the key too here, besides the initial windup of actually charging it, just doesn't really look that great either, if I'm being honest. It is just kind of glowing a little bit, which is nice, then it's just sitting there, but again, the beams aren't moving. I guess this is sort of a thing with Dragon Ball. When a Ki Blast initially makes contact with the character, the beams don't go too crazy, but it just feels very lame on top of everything else. And then obviously when 17 blasts Goku away, he is still just sitting there. There really isn't a lot of movement. Obviously his hair and the bandana is moving, which is nice, but the static pose on him also just doesn't make the shot feel very dynamic either. And when Goku gets blasted away, the initial sort of glow of the ki expanding is pretty cool to sort of symbolize that the shot is about to fire. But when Goku actually gets blasted away, it is just sort of a 1, 2, 3, and then there's a beam, right? It's just not that interesting. And finally leading up to Goku flying towards the island with the beam also sort of kind of feeling the same way for me. It's just sort of a good old McDonald's golden arch, right? Not really that interesting as Goku flies towards the planet. And this is one of actually the few explosions that I am not quite a fan of. Not only does the explosion itself just kind of look okay to me, I feel like the rocks flying everywhere towards the screen, again, it sort of looks like it's animated purposefully to look like it's coming from an explosion, more than feeling natural like these are rocks coming from an explosion of a blast of energy just hitting the earth. I think the smoke is actually okay, and the ki obviously coming up from the sky looks pretty cool, but overall, not a fan of this animation with all of the jankiness in here and not a lot of impact, all the rest. But I do have to say a little bit of a, I don't want to give it a pass, but I do have to mention something for Super 17's essay specifically, and something that I just want to make sure is in this video so that it isn't a point of contention, not only in people discussing the essays in the comments, but also because this is something that I wanted to make sure that I included in the video so people were clear on it. The reason why this essay, and possibly a lot of the other essays that I felt like were kind of this year, was because the source material also suffered either the same problems or was just sort of uninteresting. Super 17's fight here with Goku in the scenes that this was taken from are kind of the same complaints that I have with the animation for a lot of the different points that I made. And I think that is the case with a lot of these Dokkan essays that I feel like are sort of on the lower end from this year, is that the source material that they take from is not too entirely interesting. I know in last year's video I used a ton of the comparisons between Dokkan and the anime, while this year I sort of wanted Dokkan to stand on its own 2 feet in terms of my analysis of these super attacks. I did feel like this is something worth mentioning, because obviously if the developers are taking from boring source material, you know, the result is going to be boring because the original thing was boring. Now obviously that sort of gets into the territory of, well, why don't they just make original super attacks then for the character? And I know people talk about a lot that they either prefer super attacks that are from the anime, or they prefer super attacks that are original to Dokkan. And while I personally like both, I don't see why they either couldn't mix up both of those things or just do a little bit more to make the super attacks more interesting while still keeping the original animation in mind and keeping the super attack grounded in the original vision of the source material. And finally, coming in at number 1 for the worst Dokkan Battle Super Attack of 2021, we have the untransformed Super Attack of Tech, Kale, and Caulifla. Oh, baby, this one was so bad. I saw this one, and I didn't like it when I initially saw it. I still don't like it now, and I don't think I ever will like it, which is really a shame because I actually quite like Caulifla's actual, not only the transformation, despite again, ironically enough, me talking about it being in Fighters, I think this is one of the ones that where they adapted it from Fighters. It actually looks pretty okay, and actually really liking Caulifla's super attack. I think it's animated beautifully, and it does that scene very well. I really dislike the untransformed super attack, and ironically enough, I may even, I don't know why I said ironically, I might hate it. I genuinely might hate this one. This might be the only one from this year that I watch and go, bleh. That animation is dookie, bro. Now, let's go ahead and go through this one. So, right from the get-go, I think that the movement of the characters coming in is okay. Right? I like the way that they come on screen, but again, it is that same PNG sliding in syndrome, right? There isn't much overall movement on the characters. There isn't much minimal movement on the characters to make them feel more lifelike. The transition as well is just sort of okay. When they transition from one pose to the next, they just kind of anamorph their way into the other pose, which is interesting. They show the card art quite early on in this animation, which they don't do a ton, I feel like, in Dokkan essays anyway. But the next part is just them sliding their PNGs forward with a little bit of air effect. I guess you would call that, just to symbolize them moving fast. And this is one time that I actually don't think I like the effects. Not only do the effects feel kind of lame, but also I feel like if you need the speed lines to be showing their speed, maybe you shouldn't just be moving the PNG forward and zooming in on it. Maybe like add a little bit of extra in there, you know what I mean? I don't think the speed line should have been removed, even if they did move the characters more, but it just kind of shows to me that they're like, hey, ooh, yeah, that's just a little bit okay. The Ki Blast, when Caulifla charges it in the next section, I actually do quite like. But again, this is literally just PNG moving .mov, right? They're literally just zooming out and then transitioning to the next PNG of Caulifla launching the super attack, which again, Ki Blast looks pretty good, I think. I do like the sort of like camo look of the different shades of red within the Ki Blast. I think that is quite nice, and obviously I like the effects around the Ki Blast. Same thing with Kale. It is basically just PNG zooming out and even less movement, transitioning from her close-up PNG to the far away PNG. She does have a little bit more movement in the very beginning of her shot. When her head comes into frame, it feels like a lot more movement than Caulifla's. I think Caulifla's head actually does move when she's first put in the frame, kind of zoomed up, but it's more like her arm is there and then they just sort of slide her head into frame, which I don't really like. Whereas with Kale, it really feels like more that she's actually leaning into the shot for you to see her face. Again, same thing with her Ki Blast though. I think that the charge up and the execution of the Ki Blast look pretty good. Now, them actually firing at the enemy character, it looks alright. Nothing really to complain about here. I don't really see anything that I'm like off-put by. But then we have this section here with them charging up the Ki Blast, and oh boy, I really don't like this section because, oh man, the Ki looks pretty good, right? I like the way that the key sort of swirls around the ball in Caulifla's Ki Blast. I think that's cool. Obviously, the nice green glow around Kale's Ki Blast is pretty nice, but they are literally just 2 PNGs. And I do like the lighting that sort of goes around them, right? But it's just so boring. It's just so boring. They're just standing there and then they change the angle like, oh wow, it's so much more interesting now that I'm looking at them from the other side. Ooh, so cool, right? Funny enough, the only part of this essay that I can say that I confidently enjoy without nitpicking for something to like is the part where they actually have their faces close up, right, with a little electricity cut in. Even though, again, it is just basically a static image, right? Obviously, there's the speed lines and the electricity in the middle. You know, I do like that close-up shot of them. And the way that it slides apart is pretty neat. This part, though, again, bro, they're just standing there. He's just standing there menacingly. Like, show me some movement. Show me a little bit of wind-up on the Ki Blast. Like, I don't think the key looks too bad. I kind of like the way that the key be moving, though. But those far away, you know, sprites, models don't look that good. And them just standing there is just not very interesting. And then I gotta say, ironically enough, despite quite liking the key for the majority of this part, I don't really like the key when it's actually just flying forward. It looks really boring. It literally just looks like 2 birthday candles going at the enemy, right? And then obviously it doesn't help that our favorite friend, the sprite, is just sort of jammed in between them with, you know, of course, he has no movement because, you know, he's stuck as 2 different PNGs in his sad existence. But then obviously the key flies together and sort of merges into one. I do like the effect around the actual blast, but I don't like the way that the blast moves forward. I think that it looks cool as it's spinning around each other with the different colors merged together, but it just sort of, again, being slid across the screen is just very unappealing. And when it finally hits the ground, I do actually like that part a lot, because I think the key explosion with the different colors in there sort of complementing each other and moving in between each other is nice. But man, Kale and Caulifla's movements in this one are so boring and so bad. I thought that we were done with PNGs just moving across the screen, or even more so, just being standing still. I feel like it says a lot about this when you know, I say that really the big thing for me in this year in terms of essays was Ki Blast that I really like. And the only thing that I like from this animation is the Ki Blast. And I don't even like all of them, right? Kale and Caulifla's animations are just so uninspired and so just, they're too static. There's just not enough movement. Like, even with a lot of the other animations, where there would be things that I would complain about where the movement would be kind of janky, right? At least there was movement. At least the characters moved, right? And even when there wasn't a lot of movement in the other essays, the animators did a lot to sort of make it feel a lot more lifelike with very minimal movements, right? They had either hair flowing, or they had like the bangs of the hair flowing, right? Or different pieces of the clothing were sort of, you know, blowing in the wind, like the fabric, right? But you get none of that here. You just get PNG Caulifla 1 and PNG Caulifla 2, you know, move across screen from left to right. I am not a big fan of this one, and for this year, this was absolutely my worst essay. Again, this one being genuinely the only one that I think I look back on and say I really dislike. But that is the end. Wow, we made it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really am keen to hear what you guys think were the worst Dokkan Battle animations of this year. Obviously, you don't have to agree with my picks, or you can. That would be cool too. But I do want to hear what are your guys' top 5 least favorite Dokkan animations from this year. Obviously, we have a ton of animations to pick from, but there aren't really a lot to sort of choose from in terms of the bad department. Again, it was really hard to pick for this video. Like, a lot of the things towards the lower end, and especially the honorable mentions, were really just nitpicks, which I think is honestly a good thing for Dokkan, because of course that just means that animations in general are getting better and better as the years go on. I feel like I had a lot less to complain about in this video than I did in last year's video, which is great. That means that they're doing a good job and they're improving. So I hope to see that in the future, and I'm going to be very curious to see if we get any more animations that I would consider either as bad as this year's worst or last year's worst, which I still don't think anything can top Goku Black in recent time anyway, because for a recent essay, oh, that baby's still bad. That's definitely still worse than Caulifla. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Keep an eye out for the best of 2021 later on this month. And I'm thanking you guys so much for your patience right now. Thank you. Because obviously, with all these end of the year videos, they're taking a lot longer to make than I initially thought. So I just want to thank you guys so much for your patience on waiting for them. Obviously, I want to make them as best quality as I can, and I want them to be edited nicely and all that good stuff. So they are for you to enjoy at the highest degree. I will catch you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Dokkan Assets out. Peace.